Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
With the unemployment rate stuck at more than 10% and a big bet on 38 studios now a bust, Rhode Islanders are eager for new thinking on the economy. This week, they got some. A study commissioned by Governor Chafee calls for overhauling the Economic Development Corporation and reorienting state government to promote commerce. Will this latest report spark a turnaround or get tossed aside like the Greenhouse Compact? And what are Rhode Island's advantages in the 21st century? This week on Executive Suite, two views on fixing Rhode Island's economy. Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi. Joining me on the second half will be John is with me, Lou Mazzucchelli, who has some unique ideas on how to reboot Rhode Island's economy. But before we get to that, joining me now is John Simmons. He's the executive director of the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council, RIPEC, the business-backed think tank that put together this study, heavy study, for Governor Chafee on how to reorient the EDC and economic development strategy. John, thanks for being here with me.
It's my pleasure.
I don't think I've had you on yet on this show.
Not as of yet. I've not had the pleasure of coming.
Well, glad to have you here.
I watch it, but I haven't had the pleasure yet.
I'll believe the lies. So let's jump right in. But before we get to your recommendations on what to do, I want to start with your findings. You briefed reporters earlier this week, and what stuck out to me from what you said was that nobody in state government with real authority is solely responsible and focused on promoting commerce and economic development. That might surprise people since it seems like that's the job of the EDC director.
Yes, what we found was an apparent lack of focus within the state government itself. By statute, the EDC was created as a distinct and separate part of from state government. So we could not find a comparable position as many others, for instance, those who are helping poor or other various segments of our community were represented by individuals within state government. We could not find someone who was promoting commerce within Rhode Island on a consistent basis within government, ideally at the highest level of state government. That was apparent lacking when you look at other states. For instance, every state in New England, there is a governmental function, a governmental structure that relates to that function. We believe that's the first part of the resolution, is to put it back into state government, to have the state government focus on commerce and the promotion of economic development.
And that might be part of the confusion for people. The EDC is a quasi-public agency. It's created by the state but independent from the state. That was the idea when Governor Allman did that in the 1990s. You think that approach has not worked?
We believe that approach has not worked. Simply as you have no one in government promoting commerce or business. This is an entity by its very challenge was to be distinct and separate from government, but to be the lead agency for the state. And then when you look at the vision and mission from the EDC, it is to promote jobs or create jobs and help businesses. It's not about the broader picture, for instance, an economic development plan or business climate. It had no status in those areas or those arenas to be able to make real fundamental changes within how our economy is either perceived or how it actually works.
So let's turn to the recommendations. Your big suggestion that's getting the most attention is it would effectively reduce the role of the EDC. EDC would still exist under a different name, but you'd create a new Secretary of Commerce job with an office to go with it. Not a huge staff or anything, but the key for you is the Secretary would report directly to the governor. What's the idea there?
Again, that to put into the highest office within the state government, the governor's office, who was normally held responsible for this, someone who came in every day to work on commerce and the promotion of commerce within the state, that would be able to transfer information, to be able to help other departments to think about commerce as an important piece of the state. We don't have that now. And
does it really matter though if someone's thinking about it? You know, is that you've served in government as well as outside of government?
That's why it's important to have someone there. If you don't have someone that comes in, or a department, or a focus, or questions to how does this impact businesses within the state, then it's not considered. And we believe it needs to be at the highest level of state government. We looked at all 50 states, and the majority of them have somewhere in state government, close to the governor, someone that has a staff, a support that considers how the government can help. Government's in economic development, it's in commerce today, What we don't have in it is someone who is proactive for business or for the commerce itself. We have regulatory entities, we have permitting entities, we have entities that work for labor. There are more people in state government to work on people who are unemployed, to work on Veterans Affairs, for instance. But we have nothing within state government that says we are here to help and promote. And as we said, to take this change and make the state a partner in development as opposed to a barrier.
You know I have viewers who are skeptical of government just as a first principle. I was interested, you found every state in the union has some sort of governmental role in promoting economic development. None has a purely private sector approach.
We could not find anyone that had it purely private. We found that some have a similar arrangement as Rhode Island, a quasi agency that is doing it, but where in the governor's office we found in the majority of the states that it was in government, closely related to the governor itself. And for instance, all 6 of the states in New England have a somewhere in state government that function.
You also want to rename the EDC and call it the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation. Obviously, people say, well, that's a cosmetic change. Why is that important?
It is a change. It could be perceived to be cosmetic, but the branding of the EDC today, when we did all of our interviews, and as you know, we did about 75 interviews, over 100 people. We attended the Rhode Island Foundation event, which had 300 people, and the majority of the people we've talked to said that the brand name of EDC was so tarnished and so toxic that a brand name of change would be appropriate, but along with the mission and vision change as well. And we believe the Commerce Corporation should be more inwardly looking. What is the economic activity that should be done, and it should be customer-centric. And that's businesses should have someone that helps them out on their particular needs along governmental lines.
And another key thing here was the Commerce Corporation, what was the EDC, under your recommendations. It would exist, it would be sort of executing strategy put together in the governor's office and by elected policymakers and their staff on an overall economic strategy.
Yeah. Well, it's a little broader on the economic strategy. We have a recommendation that there actually be take a step back, have a large group of diverse stakeholders within the state, craft an economic development plan for the state that others can be aligned to it and be coordinated with that plan. And then we believe the Commerce Corporation should take its own policy from that point on, and how do you execute the economic development strategies done by a more collective, consensus-driven piece, including the governor and others. And we feel in that sense they actually are fulfilling their mission, and that is to help fundamentally create the economy, the environment to which economy can grow and businesses can grow, and help where it's necessary and be more customer orientated.
I've already heard criticism of the idea you put forward that the new Commerce Secretary would oversee the Department of Business Regulation, the Department of Environmental Management, and the Department of Labor and Training. Those would still exist independently, but the Secretary of Commerce, their leaders would report to that person. Why did you suggest that?
Well, again, this was a changing of the emphasis and really a major statement about whether the state was now interested in commerce. If you separate out the regulatory and permitting entities from that relationship, then you've really set up another department of equal weight in the sense of across the state lines. We wanted to put it in the governor's office as high up as possible to say that we are now about being a partner with business as opposed to a barrier. If you look at 3 of the entities we talk about, they're all regulatory or permitting entities for businesses. We have a major change now.
To be honest, they're often roadblocks businesses feel.
Well, if you listen to what we've heard on all those interviews and discussions, the basic concept was they are the engine of our economy, businesses, and the brakes is state government. Mm-hmm. We want to change that dynamic. We believe it can be, and still maintain the functions, because our recommendation says the statutory construction of DEM, DLT, and the others would stay as they are. The person would report through to a secretary that would coordinate and align the activities of those 3 departments to be on the other side of it, as opposed to being what can we do, what do you need, instead turning it to how do we help you.
You've shared your recommendations with the governor and state lawmakers. What's the response so far?
It's as expected. We feel that it's a fairly broad set of recommendations. They need to be analyzed and vetted by each of the bodies, the governor's office as well as the legislature. I think we received the response that we anticipated.
Interesting. All right. The chamber yesterday said they should act within 90 days on this. Without forcing you to agree with that timeline, how quickly do you think action needs to be taken?
We believe that action will be taken much quicker than 90 days. It may not be all, but it may be in a phased approach, and that is our recommendation. We'll be providing to the governor an implementation or a transition plan, and we believe there are a series of things that should be done and should be done quickly. There are items that are ongoing now. For instance, statewide plan. The state already has that process in a way starting. We've asked it to be changed to be more consensus driven. That's ongoing, so that can occur immediately. The business climate analysis that we looked at for a legislative packet to be submitted in January can be started now, and we are actually starting that analysis to be able to provide whatever details to a working group if the governor so sees fit to have.
All right, we have to take a break. I want to thank John Simmons for joining me. If you want to read RIPEC's full report, it's on their website. It's also on my website, on my blog, Nisi's Notes on PRI.com. When we come back, veteran Rhode Island tech entrepreneur Lou Mazzucchelli offers his critique of Rhode Island's economic strategy. Stay with us on Executive Suite.
Reactions to your report, but
welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. Joining me now is Lou Mazzucchelli. He founded Cadre Technologies, which was a thriving Providence-based business in the 1980s and 90s, and he's now a visiting scholar at Brown University. Lou, thanks for being here.
good morning, Ted.
Lou, you've taken a look at some of the recommendations in the RIPEC study. What do you think?
Well, I think, you and I are on the same page. I actually copied page 40 of that report.
I'm open to that, too. Yep.
The great minds think alike. I had a couple of initial reactions. I think the report is comprehensive. There's a lot of good data in it. It's heavy on structural solutions. Leading with branding, I have some issues with, and I think that's partially because the brand equity for the EDC brand outside of the state is zero, not negative. And so using the resources to rebrand something that might not matter nationally is questionable. I have some issues with in light of these kinds of objectives, for those of you who can't see this paper, but it'll be on your blog, right?
That's right.
Here's a set of objectives by which you could measure an agency like EDC or the new proposed agency or whatever. I would argue if EDC had been managed to these objectives, we might not be having this discussion.
And just so people understand, this is John Simmons and RIPEC in their report looked at in Michigan. They have a series of metrics: deployed capital, retained college graduates, all of which are looked at by the Economic Development Agency there to see if they're getting the job done.
Yeah, and if these had been transparent, if these had been part of the objectives of the agency and transparently managed and people were actually held accountable, I think we'd be in a different situation, but none of those things have happened.
You gave a fascinating presentation a few months back, which is why I wanted to have you here on the show. You were talking to students, or to educators, I believe, in STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics?
Yes.
About economic development overall. And the first thing I wanted to ask you about from that is you made a distinction between sticky resources and non-sticky resources. What was that about?
Well, if you look at sources of competitive advantage, and we're trying to think about what makes Rhode Island, unique in the universe of states that are competing for things. A heavy resource is a resource that can't be relocated out of the state easily, like the Naval War College or Brown University. They're not going to pull up stakes and go. A corporation at random is much more volatile. All right, there's generally not much holding them to the state, and if you base a policy based on those light resources, and they leave, the policy can suffer in the wake of that. The other thing that's important about that is that economic development in a nutshell is really about bringing dollars out of the state into the state.
Let me pause you right there because I have a few of the slides from your presentation, and one of the ones I want to show is a map, and it looks at, you say this is economic development in one slide. So keep talking about what you're saying there. Here it is for people to see.
Okay, great. Well, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, you have one arrow that's goods and services aimed out across the border, and you have another arrow that's labeled with dollar signs going into the border. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have lots of businesses inside the state doing really interesting things, but we're talking about what are called traded jobs. And this is the source of real economic development if you're trying to increase the pie. If we can't bring dollars into the state, we're gonna be moribund. And the ways we do that are manyfold, and some we're doing. Tourism, for instance, is a great source of dollars into the state. Destination education is a great source of dollars into the state. The problem with destination education is people come, they learn, they spend money, and they leave. So we don't get the benefit of any tail of creating all these bright brains. They go to California, New York, or wherever they end up.
It's almost thinking of Rhode Island as an exporter within the United States marketplace, especially in New England.
From an economic development perspective, you have to think about it as an exporter because that's how you bring dollars into the state.
Okay. Another slide I wanted to show, and this is a concern to you. This is small business formations in Rhode Island, and this was something you wanted to highlight in that presentation. You can see there, as the recession comes up, the number of closings soars and openings trickles down, and on net we see a real loss.
You know, what I was trying to do in the presentation was look at the silver bullets that people have sort of hung on to and said, this is the answer, this is the answer, this is the answer. And one of the bullets that's proposed is small business is going to be the answer to our problem. The reality is small businesses are highly volatile. They're wonderful things, but they come, they go, they struggle. Many of them fail. And I mean, the data bears that out. And if you look at the largest producer of jobs across the spectrum of business sizes, it turns out that small and medium businesses, these are businesses that are, say, between 100 and 500 million in revenue, turn out to be the greatest job creators, not the small businesses.
You also looked at employment sectors and the share of employment in certain sectors. I don't have the slide on this, but fascinating to me. Education and health make up a larger share of Rhode Island's jobs than in any other state as a share of all the jobs. And transportation, trade, and utilities, fewer jobs as a percentage than in any other state. What do you make of that?
Well, I think the first part is the law of small numbers in terms of population. All right, as a percentage, we just have a very small population. The latter issue really speaks to weaknesses in economic development policy, because one of the things, if you're trying to bring dollars into the state from other places, one of the things you do to attract non-tourism, well, actually tourism too, but certainly non-education, is infrastructure investment. You know, I was away from the state for 12 years and came back and found that Quonset was still basically the way I left it 12 years ago. I was dumbfounded. All right, a sticky asset, horribly underutilized.
We have to take a break. When we come back, Lou will talk about what he sees when he looks at the General Assembly. It might be a little different from what you think at home. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi. My guest is Lou Mazzucchelli, co-founder of Cadre Technologies and a visiting scholar at Brown University. Lou, I'm a political reporter a lot of the time, and one of my favorite slides you had was you had two different ways of looking at the makeup of the General Assembly. And I want to call up the first one, you had it by party. And you said, you know, as we know, this is a very democratic state. This is how most people look at it.
Right. This is the way most people think about the legislature, and they say, okay, it's one party, nothing can ever happen that's, you know, against the will of the one party. And you can't argue with these numbers. But I think that this doesn't give an observer the entire picture.
And so if we can go to the second slide you have on the Assembly, this is a different way to look at it. You broke down how the General Assembly, basically the employment of members of the General Assembly, and here we have it. You see a big share of lawyers, a big share of public, nonprofit, and unions, very small number from large businesses. What else do you see there?
Well, the reason this slide exists is because if you think about the school of management theory that says that people basically revert to what they know if they're in a threatening situation. And basically people do what they're comfortable with. And so what I tried to do is step way back and say, okay, let's look at these people and what do they know? What are their instinctive reactions going to be like? And since these are part-time jobs, all right, these people have lives, they have this sort of split personality. Let's look at what their real life looks like compared to their time on Smith Hill. And you see the data there. So for instance, if you look at public nonprofit union and retired, the biggest chunk of retired turns out to be retired public nonprofit unions. So if you're stepping back and you're looking at what Rhode Island's been up to over the last few years in terms of pensions and all that kind of, and this is why we're getting the result we're getting is look at what these people have as their best interests. And the smallest sliver there are people who have daily responsibilities in large business. So in terms of looking at the prospects for legislative support for big business economic development things, that graph tells me not to be terribly optimistic.
Now, another thing you mentioned in this presentation, you see in Rhode Island a bias toward higher education, you called it. What do you mean by that, and what do we do instead, in your view?
Okay, so the bias turns out to be in terms of where the big research dollars are. All right, there's a lot of, I mean, you know, higher education's a great thing. I went to college, you went to college, good. But in terms of where universities and colleges are growing, it can't come out of tuition. So a lot of administrators have said, good, we're going to become research universities, we're going to get hundreds of millions of dollars from...
Brown University has huge success attracting...
URI is trying too. Everyone's trying to play that game, okay? That tends to blind people towards the higher education institutions. And if you look at the destination education aspects of Rhode Island, and you look at the number of retained college graduates that we're creating, which isn't very high, okay, you have to say, is there another way to build a labor force that could be here if a business wanted to come into the state? And I think the innovative way to think about that is to try and do something with K-12.
You said fix high school diplomas.
A high school diploma right now is pretty useless. All it is a piece of paper that maybe lets you try and get into college to get a bachelor's degree. I mean, people need bachelor's degrees now to file reports. I learned the alphabet in 4th grade, or I don't know about you. And so we've had grade inflation, we've had degree inflation, and I think there's an opportunity for the state to differentiate itself by saying, we've got a high school diploma that actually means something. Of course, that's all eyewash until a company actually hires somebody based on that diploma. But that would begin to differentiate our workforce, and it would be something that from a, you step back, an economic development czar, secretary, head of an EDC, whatever, could use as a tool to try and attract businesses to the state.
Now, you, when Cadre was a going concern in the 80s and 90s, you got a lot of attention. I want to know not so much about the specific recommendations on the table today from John and RIPEC, those will be debated, but the role of government in economic development. How important is government to laying the groundwork? I mean, some people are very laissez-faire, get it out of the way. Where do you see the role of government? Where don't you?
Well, I think that certainly government is not in the business of picking winners and losers. We've had a 25-year, 30-year history of attempts made there, and they have all generally failed.
That would be 38 Studios, Alpha, Beta, other.
Cytotherapeutics, we could just tick them all off, okay? I think that the government is responsible for creating an environment that is conducive to business formation. And what defines that environment? A skilled workforce, decent infrastructure, smooth regulatory pathways, smooth licensing pathways, manageable union environment. Tick, 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 tick. And you can, that to me is a reasonable role for government in building an environment where somebody who wants to develop a business or bring a business to the state can say, this is a friendly place for me to be. Just 2 weeks ago, there was the example of the boat building company that we lost. That to me is the poster child for opportunity that we've blown, because it wasn't a big business. It was a small business that we could have really made a difference for. It makes sense in this state, and we should have thousands of businesses like that.
Which, without picking winners and losers, which sectors give you hope in Rhode Island? Which do you see, if things went the Lou Mazzucchelli way, where do you think there could be real growth?
Well, I think that there is an opportunity in the healthcare space for destination medicine. I think there's an opportunity in mobilizing our small population for market research and medical devices and maybe drugs. We used to be a market research hotspot for consumer products. Pepsi Clear was in Providence a million years ago. A strange product. Okay?
That went well.
It was cognitive dissonance in a bottle, basically. So I think we have to be creative about that. I think that developing industries that take advantage of a deep water port is something that we squander that daily.
All right, Lou, well, I have to cut you off there. It's a fascinating conversation, and it will continue. It's all the time we have this week. I want to thank Lou Mazzucchelli for being here, and I also want to thank John Simmons from RIPEC, who joined us in the first half to discuss their new report on fixing the EDC. If you missed that, you can catch it on our website, along with every other episode of Executive Suite on WPRI.com. We'll see you next week.